Imagine you wake up early in the morning and you think to yourself, I think I want to roast someone today. Well, you're in luck because I'm going to show you how to do it, where when the user click a button, they will get roasted. A roast page that lists all the roast sets for each individual with personalized, where you can just copy the link and share it to your recipients. Pretty cool, huh? Let's jump right to it. So the first thing that we need is to create a file to store all our rows for each of our individual recipients, and we will name it, obviously, roast.json file. The way we store is quite simple. We're going to have a list called roast, and then inside we're going to have the object of the roast, where we can start with the name property, and then we're going to have a roast object which will define each level from light, medium, and also burn. And we also have a pre-roast. This is a sentence that we're going to actually output before we actually say the roast. It's like giving a greeting before we burn someone. So for our app, we're going to have only two pages, where the first page is going to list all the rows for each of the individuals. And we're also going to have a button where we can copy the link easily. And the second is the roast page, where this is the page where we're going to send to our individuals, our recipients, and we'll get them roasted. So we're going to create our app using Next.js because to deploy it on Versa, it's very easy to do so. Once that's done, we're going to import it on VS Code. And then we're going to run our project because we want to check if this installed properly. Looks good. Next, we're going to create our roast.json file, where this is where we're going to store all the roast. I'm just going to copy and paste the one that I've created from ChatGPT. Looks good. And then we're going to do some cleanup on the home page. We're going to remove all these placeholder just because I want to make it look clean. Nice. Next, we're going to create the two pages that I mentioned before. The first being the roast page, where we're going to have all the list of roasts for each individual. And the second page, we're going to create it inside of the roast directory. We're going to name it as a square bracket name because this one is going to be a dynamic page. In the roast list page, I'm just going to put some dummy HTML content. For the dynamic page, we're going to actually render the name that is being placed in the URL so that we can see that it's actually dynamic and it's be able to render properly. So the main row looks good. And also for the dynamic one, apparently I forgot to actually put use client at the top. Refresh it again, and we can see that it rendered properly. Now for the rows list page, we're going to start off with just adding a title and a description of the page, just like that. And then we're going to actually render the list of the rows pages from the rows.json file. And to do that, we're going to import rows.json file at the top of our file. And then we're going to render it using map. And essentially, we're able to produce this list. Now, let's input two clickable icons on the right side, which is the first one is going to be a copy icon where we can copy to our clipboard. And the second one is when we click it, we can view the rows page of the individual recipients. We're going to install a new dependency called Lucid React, which allows us to import the icons. We're going to import copy and icon. So now it's there, but essentially at the moment, if you click it, there's nothing going to happen. So now we're going to handle the on-click function call for both of these icons. So the first one is going to be the handle copy link. So essentially what's going to happen is going to get the URL and then put it in a clipboard. Now for handle view link, we're going to use a React code called use router, where we're going to get it and then just push the new URL so that we can view it. And of course, when you use a React hook, we need to use client at the top of our file. And then currently we're able to produce it. We're able to actually copy the link, and when we paste it, we're able to copy it properly. And to test out our view link, when we click it, we're actually able to render it properly. And we can see we are able to render Samuel, which is at the end of the URL path, into our page. That's pretty much everything we need to do for this rows list page. Let's go on to our dynamic page. So first, we're going to replace with our initial design. Essentially, first we're going to have our title with the name of the person, the pre-rows, the rows itself, and finally the button for the user to click. So it should look something like this. So now let's replace the pre-rows and the rows with the actual value, not some hard-coded value. So first we're going to import the rows.json file. Next, we're going to create a variable that will retrieve the rows set for this specific person using the find method and to filter out based on the name of our rows recipient. Because if we want to get for Samuel, we go for Samuel. And if it's for Alia, then we go for Alia. So now let's replace the hard-coded value with variables where we're going to instantiate using the useState React hook, which is going to be rows, which is our roast, pre, which is our pre-roast, and then we're going to create another one, which is called level, to indicate which level of roast that we are going to be rendered. I'll explain in a bit why the initial value is like this. Just a second, let me replace the value. So when the user enters the page, we wanted to render the pre-roast first. So that's why we set the pre-roast to light. And we don't want the user to be roasted first because we want them to click the button. So that's why we set the roast to be a placeholder. So when the user clicks the button, then we're going to set the roast into the light level because this is the first roast. And then we set the pre-roast into the medium to be ready for the next level of roast. So again, when the user click the button, we set the roast into the medium level and set the pre-roast to burn. Again, when this is click again, we're going to set the roast into the burn. And because this is the final level, which is the burn level, the highest level of roast, that's why we set the pre-roast into an end state, where we just put it with an end string. That's pretty much the logic behind the variable for each level when the user clicks the button. Okay, so let's implement that logic. So we're going to create a function called handler click, where it's going to be called every time the button is clicked, and pretty much we're going to be implementing the logic that I explained before. Something I forgot to include in my explanation is actually the level variable, but it's pretty much straightforward. This is a variable we need to keep track to check which level we are, and we want to render the correct pre-rows and rows. So now, and we click the button, now the rows and the pre-rows is going to change every time we click the button until the very end. So for a better UI, let's disable this button when we are at the end. So what we can do, we know at the end the level is going to be 4. So what we can do is we set disable if the level is equals to 4, just like that. Now it is disabled. So now every time we click the button, the rows and the previews is going to change as expected. Now let's start with implementing the animation to make our UI feel a lot more better. Before that, let me refactor a bit of our code here, where we're going to be separating the update rows and pre-rows logic outside of handle click, because we are going to make this function doing a lot more animation. So in order for us to do our animation, we're going to install a library called gsap. We're going to import gsap at the top of the file, and we want to make a reference for each of these elements so we can animate them anytime we want. So we're going to create a rows reference, pre-ref, title reference, and button reference object using useRef React hook, and then we're going to put it in the HTML just like that. So the first animation that we are going to do is to fade out the rows and the pre-rows every time we click the button. So we're going to create a variable to keep track of our animation timeline called main using gsap.timeline. And then we're going to make the animation for the rows, where we're going to reduce the opacity to 0 to make it fade out. And we're going to animate pre-rows to fade out also by delaying to 2 seconds. So as you can see, when we click the button, the row is going to fade out. After 2 seconds, the pre-row is also going to fade out, which is nice. So now we're able to do the fade out animation. Now we are going to do the fade in animation. So in the onComplete callback function, we're going to call the update rows function to first update the rows value to the next level. And then we're going to do the animation for our rows by set the opacity to 1. And same goes to pre-rows. And now you can see when we click this button, it's going to fade out and then fade in as expected. Now it looks much more nicer. So now the fade out and fade in animation looks good. Now let's make the rows to actually shake every time it appears so that we can give some sort of get roasted feeling-ish. If you know what I mean. To do that animation, first we're going to actually create a separate roast animation function because that animation is going to be quite big. And then we're going to delete this because we won't be needing this anymore. Okay, so this is how it goes. First, we're going to instantiate the timeline to control all the animation to happen subsequently. So first, what we want to do is to make the rows to scale up, make it bigger, and make the opacity to 1 to make it appear in 0.3 seconds, so it'll become poppy. And then we are going to make the shaking animation to go left and right with a total of 6 times. This is where the shaking happens. And then after it's done shaking, we're going to reduce the scale back to its original size, and then that's pretty much all the animation. And now we're able to make the shaking animation every time the user clicks the button. Looks very amazing now. Okay, so we're almost done. We're going to make an intro animation where when the user enters this page, we are going to render each of the element to fade in one by one to make it look very clean. Because this animation is going to happen once, we are going to use the use effect react hook, and we're going to put an empty list because we want this to run once, and then we are going to make the intro animation function. So the intro animation will look like this. First, we're going to set the rows to have an opacity to 0 because we don't want to show the rows until the user click the button. And we're just going to fade in the title, the pre-rows, and also the button into the screen normally. So we'll look at the result. As you can see, it's able to render one by one with really nice UI. And then when we click the button, we can see the rows pop. Amazing, right? And now the last thing that I need to do is actually at the end, when we have finished all the rows, as you can see, we have the end string here. We want to actually not render it at the end. So what we need to do is actually check if it's not the end level, then we'll fade in. But if actually the last level, then we won't be running this code block essentially. So if we do this again and we move it to the end, as you can see, it's going to be disappear and won't be appearing. Everyone, we have finished building our app. We have the front page with all the list of rows and we can copy the link and share it to everyone. And we also have the rows page with awesome animations and clean UI. And every time you want to add or change the rows, you can always visit the rows.json file and edit whichever you like. Now, let's deploy this to Vercel. First, we need to make our initial commit. Because I'm lazy, I'm just make all the changes into just one single commit. And then make a GitHub repo just for this code. We're gonna push it, and then we're gonna open Vercel. We're gonna import the project and just add it. Just click import button, and then we're just gonna click deploy. Wait for a bit, found an error. We're gonna fix that error by just removing unused import, push it again, and then we wait for a bit to make it ready. And when it's ready, we're just gonna open it and view it, and you can finally see our website is available on Vercel. Now it's available for everyone to see, and you can see everything looks fine. You can view the roast page and the roast looking fine. Now you can start sharing to your friends and hopefully no bloodshed will happen. Thank you. Bye.